I'm excited to be here today for DigitalOcean Deploy. Thank you so much for having me. My name's Tammy Bryant, and you can find me on Twitter, Tammy X Bryant, and also you can reach me via email, tammy@gremlin.com, or you can add me on LinkedIn. Like, always happy to chat more about site reliability engineering and SRE practices. So I work at Gremlin, and I'm a principal site reliability engineer. I've been here for almost 3 years now, so super exciting. And before this, I worked at Dropbox, and also I'm a DigitalOcean alum. I worked at DigitalOcean before this too, and that was my first company that I worked at when I moved to America. I'm Australian, so that's my accent that you can hear. G'day mate, how are ya? I'll try not to use my super Aussie voice, so it's easier for everybody. But yeah, I've been in America now for almost 6 years, and when I was in Australia, I worked at the National Australia Bank doing a lot of cool work on reliability for mortgage broking systems, foreign exchange systems, like tons of cool stuff, internet banking. So yeah, let's get into it. So today I'm here to talk to you about how you can build and scale your SRE teams. 500 million users. So I have actually been able to have the awesome opportunity of helping scale massive database systems and storage systems to be able to cater for the needs of 500 million users, which was an amazing experience. So within 2.5 years at Dropbox, we went from having 200 million to 500 million customers. Very, very cool. Obviously, that was a big responsibility, a lot of work that had to go into that to make sure that it was successful. We launched Dropbox for Business within that time. And yeah, I looked after I was the SRE manager for this databases, for the storage team, and then also for developer tools, code workflows. And I was also on call and helped out with the build team too for internal developer tooling. So lots of cool stories to share today. And, one of the things that I wanted to start off by speaking with you about is just all of the news that you fear as an SRE, to be honest. So when you're a site reliability engineer, when you're an SRE manager, when you're launching new products to market, when you're, the rest of the company spending tons of money on marketing dollars, on getting press, on just onboarding new users, scaling out every other part of the business. Something that I've always been worried about, feared about, was, I don't want to end up in the news as that SRE manager, as that site reliability engineer. Like, that is not what I want to happen. So, there's a lot of outages that you read about on the news. Black Friday failures, technical issues likely cost retailers billions of dollars, banks breaking, Citibank's website was down. Airlines have had tons of incidents lately. Probably just, I think about 2 weeks ago now, the Commonwealth Bank in Australia had a really big incident. And it's tough because it's the middle of a pandemic. There's a lot of issues already, right? People are already really stressed out. And what happened was the Commonwealth Bank was down and its customers just weren't able to access their money. So the big issue here was customers in Australia were only able to leave their house for an hour because of lockdown rules. They were only able to go for, a short amount of exercise and buy food for their families. They went to the shops to try and buy food for their kids, for their families, and they weren't able to because they couldn't get access to their money. So then people aren't able to eat. And that's like your responsibility as an SRE. I always come back to this, especially from working in a bank. It's a really big responsibility and I take it really seriously. I want to help people get access to what they need. And, if that's their money, then yeah, of course they want to be able to access their money when they need to get their money to be able to buy food. Or if it's something else, like super important documents that they need for some type of really important situation that they're going through. I want to make sure that they can access those whenever they need them. So this really comes down to teamwork. How do you actually do that? How do you scale to 500 million users? Obviously, you can't do this just by throwing more people at this problem of being able to handle that large responsibility and scale out your teams and onboard all these new people and make sure that you meet the demands. It's all about teamwork. It's about hiring a great team, a small team, a team that works well together, and making sure that everyone understands their role, what they need to do, the skills that they bring to the table, and then getting them to just work together and be intelligent, make smart decisions. And that's how you really win championships. You know, it's a great quote by Michael Jordan: talent wins games, but teamwork and intelligence win championships. And to me, like, a championship in our world is that huge press conference that's happening because you just launched a new product. That is a championship. You want to make sure that everything is freaking amazing on that day as a site reliability engineer. So what do SREs do? Well, I'm going to tell you a story. I think that's always one of the great ways to learn about what different folks do. And I've been doing reliability work for a really long time. I've always, you know, spent a lot of time on call. I've done a lot of incident management work, worked on a lot of automation tooling, helped scale out teams, you know. But I think one story that I'd like to share today is a few years back, I was the incident manager on call at Dropbox, and there was a huge outage that happened at the time. It was the AWS S3 outage, really famous one. It took down like a ton of the internet because lots of people at the time were dedicated solely to just using S3 in one specific region. And obviously that caused a massive problem. And that's when a lot of people started to see the fragility of the internet and how there had been like decisions made to just, you know, only rely on one very small part of a service to make sure that everything worked well. Obviously, you need to have failover in place. You need to have redundancy. You need to have backup plans. That's what SREs really focus on. And so what happened during this outage is I was the incident manager on call. That means I was responsible for all of Dropbox.com, all of the Dropbox desktop client, all of the mobile apps as well, pretty much every single thing. And that's obviously a big role. And I was doing that rotation that week. It was a 24/7 rotation. And I would do it every 3 weeks. We had a pretty small team at the time. Every like 3 to 5 weeks, I was on call. And, you know, I took it really serious. I made sure that I was able to be paged and I would respond really fast. My goal is to be able to respond and do what I need to do within 5 minutes. So I always made sure I had the internet, had my laptop right near me. So I remember sitting at my desk. It was like 9:30, 10 a.m. in the morning, and I got paged that there was a problem with S3. And we were getting a ton of customer tickets. So the support team, the press team was pinging me on Slack saying, what's going on? Like, there's some type of issue. We saw on the internet that S3 is down as well. And we were looking into it. At the time, we thought we'd migrated fully off S3. So we were, you know, surprised that there was some type of issue and that customers were complaining. And our monitoring was telling us that things were fine. So then I logged into Dropbox.com and customers were saying, my data's gone. My data's missing. My data's been destroyed because S3 is not available, I guess. And I logged in and I was like, like it looks like my files are there, but just the previews aren't working. Like there was X's on every single preview. So that made me think Dropbox thumbnail previews service is not working and it must still be on S3 and it hasn't been migrated away. So what did I do? We had this really cool internal tool where I can see every single service, which team owns each service, and who is on call for that service right now. So I paged that team, got them looped in, and they actually migrated off S3 during the outage, and we resolved that outage. We resolved that incident really fast. And, you know, most other folks, they weren't able to get out of that incident, and it went on for a long time, like 5 to 8 hours, something like that. We were able to recover way faster. And so, you know, an SRE's role is to, one, prevent issues from even happening in the first place. So it would have been way better if we, you know, weren't just solely relying on one service. And we fixed that going forward. You know, one region, one service. You want to have a redundancy there. And, you know, but the thing is too, when things are bad, you need to get in there and you need to fix it. You need to go fast. You need to get the right people looped in. You need to make really good, quick decisions that are smart, that are intelligent, that get you out of the bad situation. And, you know, this is a lot of what we do as SREs. So how do you think like an SRE? Well, an SRE's mission is to protect, provide for, and progress the software and systems behind services with an ever watchful eye on durability, availability, latency, performance, and capacity. So how do you build out an SRE team? One of the things that I think is really important to do here is not to go too big, don't go too fast. Make sure that you start small. I think if you don't yet have an SRE team, a good thing to do is to say, okay, let's start with 3 to 5 people with an SRE manager. You don't have to hire everyone externally. You can do something like internal transfers. Find folks that care about reliability, that care about customers, that care about making sure that data is always available and protected. You know, you can definitely spot those people. Often it's really good if you can get someone who's been at the company for a long time to work on an SRE team, someone who understands how different systems work. You know, they've worked with old code before. They know, like, you know, what's hidden under the carpet. There's something bad there, like some type of service. If you said to them, like, what are the 3 services that everyone's really scared of here, they'd be able to answer you. Also, if you asked, what are our top 5 most critical services, those folks would be able to answer that question. Those are the people that you want on that SRE team if you're doing internal transfers. But, you know, you can also hire external people. How do you do that? There's not that many SREs out there in the world, but I will share a few of my secrets of how I've hired great SREs in the past. So one big secret, there's actually a school for SREs, kind of like Hogwarts, but for SREs. It's called Holberton School, and they're actually training the next generation of SREs. So just one school totally dedicated to that. And they now have campuses actually spreading across the world, which is really cool. And they're obviously training folks online. So definitely check that out. Then if you look on LinkedIn, you'll see, I recently searched for this, there was 188,000 folks with the title SRE or Site Reliability Engineer. And then in terms of DevOps engineers, if you look at that, you know, in comparison, there's just over 500,000 folks with the DevOps engineer title. So SRE is growing rapidly. You know, we all know DevOps, we've heard of it for ages, it's super popular, and SRE is growing really fast. So that's exciting. So how do you hire SREs? So something that I did in the past was I went and talked to Holberton School. So Holberton School, their first campus is in San Francisco. I used to live in SF and it was right by where I lived actually. It was just around the corner, so I'd see them all the time. And I'm still a mentor at Holberton School. One of the co-founders actually was an SRE at LinkedIn. And before that, he was an SRE at SlideShare, which was acquired by LinkedIn. And so he totally gets SREs and he understands how important they are. He's built a curriculum that helps people learn how to become an SRE. And so I went to him and I was like, hey, like I'm looking to hire some SREs. We've done some internal transfers, but I'm going to need to hire externally. We've hired a few folks that have experience, but I have the ability to hire some folks that we can train up, you know, help them learn how to be an SRE here with us. And I wanted to start like an apprenticeship program with some other folks. And so, yeah, they helped us do that, which was really cool. We onboarded 2 SREs from Holberton School. They're still there now. They were assigned to the databases team and the traffic team, and they're doing an amazing job. So I just think, you know, you don't have to hire folks just with experience who have the title. You can also find folks who are passionate, who are interested, and who want to do it. So once you've looked at different places to hire these folks, how do you actually do the interview process? That's something that everyone often asks me about. One of my tips is to focus on trustworthiness within the interview process. So how do you tell if someone is trustworthy? And what does trustworthy mean in a site reliability engineering perspective? So in the world of SRE, you want to make sure that you can rely on people. So when they get paged for an incident, they don't just like act the incident and go back to sleep. That's the worst. You do not want people like that on your team. You want people who are going to get paged, jump out of bed, and go and fix that issue, escalate as needed, do whatever they need to do to get things back up and running, and focus on having a really fast mean time to resolution, MTTR. And then even better, you want to be able to have people on your team that you can trust to build the right automation, do chaos engineering proactively, and make it so that you actually get a reduction in pages. That's like even better. So you're trusting them to be putting the right pieces of code, the right systems in place, the right practices in place, so that you can actually create a better experience for your customers and actually reduce the amount of outages, reduce the amount of pages in the middle of the night that are happening because there are big problems. And one question that I like to ask to be able to help me identify if folks are trustworthy and if they're the right fit for the team culturally is, Do you see yourself responsible for data durability? Is it your job to prevent data loss? This is a very good telling question. When I ask this, I often get very different responses. Obviously, the best case answer is yes, of course. Like, this is what I would do to make sure that we always looked after data for customers. Of course, like, it's my job to prevent data loss. I would have backups in place. I would have redundancy. I would test my recovery procedures. I would be doing failover frequently. I would inject failure to make sure that we can handle it. I would work with other teams to make sure that they understand why it's important. I would monitor it. I would measure it. I would make sure that we were always getting faster at being able to recover if there was an issue. The answer you don't want is no, like, I don't think that's my job. Like, I wouldn't be responsible for that. That's the person who doesn't take accountability, who doesn't take responsibility, is going to be like, that's not my problem, which is definitely not a good quality for an SRE. So I'd recommend asking that question. Do you see yourself responsible for data durability? Is it your job to prevent data loss? So next up, how do you set up SREs for success? One of the really important things I think to do to help your team is just like give them some goals that they need to work towards and give them a metric that they can track to see if they're actually achieving it and being successful. So for example, if you have a lot of incidents, if you have a lot of pages, if you want to reduce them getting paged in the middle of the night, tell them, hey, I'd like to see a 20% reduction in pages in the next month. And then just give them that challenge and see what they do with it. And then check back in and see if they've actually achieved it. Once they've done that, then you can give them the next task. Or maybe you want to be able to instill better reliability practices across your whole company. So I think about this a lot like when I was previously working as a security engineer before doing reliability work. One of the things that you do as a security engineer is you teach people how to write code so that you won't get hacked. Because it's kind of more annoying to have to look at the code afterwards and then go through and tell everyone how they need to fix their code. It's better to just be preventative and teach folks how to fish. So you want to show them, hey, like, this is how we write our code so we don't have SQL injection. You can do things like, do some training sessions, some office hours, write some internal blog posts. Like, that actually goes a long way, because if they've spent a lot of time and then you catch these issues, like, in your CI/CD pipeline, like, through tests or like some sort of auditing process afterwards, it's kind of like pretty late. I think it's better to get up front. So that might be something you want to do, is do a culture shift within your organization, be able to help people learn and value reliability up front. Make sure that every new service checks a bunch of things in terms of reliability. Like, does it have good monitoring? Does it have alerting? Are we able to measure that people are able to use this service as expected? Does it get a lot of complaints from customers? Those are some of the things you want to think about. KTLO is one of my favorite things to focus on as an SRE and SRE manager, and not just doing it, but trying to reduce it. So KTLO is keep the lights on. This is a lot of your maintenance work, making sure that everything is always running. Like, for example, it could be even we need to upgrade Ubuntu because we're on an old version, but we're trying to create a healthy fleet. That's what I like to call it. You want to make sure that you're like upgrading things. You're upgrading your database. You're upgrading your monitoring agents. You're not on a really old version. But this is all KTLO. The other buckets of work that you do as an engineer are features and then also core product. So brand new features and improving the core product, and then KTLO. And some teams might have like 80% KTLO. They're like flat out doing issues like handling pages, handling incidents, doing maintenance work because there's a lot of problems. Obviously, as an SRE, you want to come in and help that team reduce their KTLO. Build in some automation so that you have self-healing systems, do work like that. And then they have more time to focus on building out that core product. And as you build new features, build new products, launch new products, they can do the work required to be able to support that. So that's a really nice thing. It gives them space and time to breathe and focus on the new cool stuff. So another tip I would say is, it's good to have distributed teams. This is something I've always done in the past, and it definitely works. The dream scenario, which has happened for me quite a few times now, is you have a team working in the day, they hand off at the end of the day to the night team. The night team works overnight, does all this amazing work. You wake up in the morning and you're like, wow, this is great. Like, they just did so much work for me. I feel amazing. Now I just get to continue. And once you've got that really smooth loop happening, it's the best. So definitely try and do that. Scaling out your SRE team, to be able to do the follow the sun model, I definitely recommend looking at having a team in, say, for example, the US and Europe, or Australia and the US, or Australia and Europe, or something like that, or also Asia, Asia Pacific. There's a lot of people that you can hire to grow your team and to be able to have that follow the sun model. You really want to scale out your team gradually, make sure that you build it out, and be really mindful of the new folks that you're onboarding. I actually also run a Slack, gremlin.com/Slack. You can join it. We have over 5,000 SREs in there from all over the world. So maybe you can find some great people to join your team. Definitely recommend you going in there and chatting to people to see if they're interested in coming on board. We have a jobs channel, so check it out. So what kind of responsibilities should your SRE team have? I think this is an important thing to think about before you build out your team for the first time, or decide to actually scale it and increase your team size. It's good to focus on this. So think about things like, you want to make sure they know they are responsible for protecting customer data. They are responsible for making sure that backups and restores happen. They are responsible for making sure that systems and services are always available for customers. That's really what they need to focus on doing, and scaling that out for your entire company. I recommend hiring people who have a bias for action. So not folks that just talk about things, but actually can focus on getting results, can measure the results with a metric, and be able to show and tell the story. Oh, I did this work, I got this result. Now look, we're going to move forward and continue to do more work. They're always really focused on getting great results. And this is actually a value at Gremlin, bias for action, one of my favorites. I just think it's awesome. Like, let's get more stuff done. Like, that's one of the coolest things about working with computers. You can build something once, you can automate it, you can scale out. You don't have to hire tons more people. You can just build great systems that heal, that look after themselves. And that's really how you can feel good at the end of the day that things are being protected and you're doing a great job. Another tip I would like to share is this idea of having a captain's log. So it's actually a postmortem for every single page. This is something most people don't do, but even if you do it for a month, it's really good. So for example, I know a lot of people would do a postmortem for a big incident. Like, okay, we had a big outage. Yes, you definitely want to do a postmortem for that. But this is different. This takes it to a whole nother level of detail where you're actually doing a postmortem for every single page that you got. For example, via PagerDuty, VictorOps, OpsGenie, that type of tool. And you're actually going and looking at the page and saying, how do we make sure that this page never happens again? Which is really different. But if you do that, you can get great results. I also recommend doing chaos engineering. So this should actually be frequent and cross-team. One example would be, for example, running region failover. So doing a black hole attack, which just means that you're making a region unavailable. Like, for example, if you use Kubernetes across different regions or data centers, then you would actually say, I'm going to make this one data center unavailable, and make sure that everything is still totally fine from the customer's perspective, that everything works as expected. That's a really good example of something that you should do for your chaos engineering practice. And I'd also recommend expanding this out and involving different teams. It's really good to just dig into failure. You'll identify tons of issues and you can just work to get them resolved. And then you never have to work on them again, which is the goal, and it's awesome. And don't just look at the things that have happened in the past, but also try and identify those unknown catastrophes. One example, I was talking to a friend just the other day, and they were telling me that, they'd never ever tested their database restore process ever, like in years. And they have a new database now. So they're like, well, we're going to do that on staging. So they actually took down their staging database and went and restored it as a team. And yeah, they were surprised because it took them, I think, like 6 hours to restore it. And they thought it was going to take them 30 minutes. So obviously that then gave them some action items for what they needed to do to make that a lot faster and improve it. But, those are the types of things that you really want to dig into and be proactive about. Imagine if you had to restore your production database in the middle of the night like that, and like you just had never done it before. You had to get on and do that at like 2 a.m., that's the worst. You want to just feel like you've got the tools in place, you're able to handle that. And yeah, it can happen. Like, it's not something that hasn't happened. It's happened to tons of companies. I mean, if you go and Google database, production database being dropped, like, you will see a ton of incidents related to that. There are some great tools you can find on GitHub. Check out PagerDuty. That's from the Dropbox SRE team. There's also awesome Slack bots that you can check out. And there's another cool tool that I like called Hermes, which is a tool that is a web UI to track the different tasks that you need to do as an SRE. So check that out too. The foundation of SRE work is monitoring and alerting. So if you look at the Google SRE pyramid, the bottom is monitoring. So what it really means here to me is that you want to make sure that you have a monitoring system in place, you're able to validate that it works as expected, and your team feels confident that they're able to know what is happening with your systems every single day at any time. You should be able to just see the status and health of your systems by, just looking at a dashboard. You should be able to get automated reports on availability. You should be able to get paged if there are issues. But that's a really important thing to think about. Who monitors the monitoring? SREs have to do it. The dream goal that you want to work towards as you scale out, and if you've got hundreds of millions of users and a small team of 5 responsible for critical systems, then you need to have self-healing systems. So this is where you've automated your backups, your restores, your clones. All of that is just happening by itself. You've got auto scaling just running. Everything's really good. Do you need an SRE team? I would say you definitely need people who think like SREs. I think it's great to have an SRE team. You want people who care about reliability and durability. It doesn't need to be a massive team. You can start small, start with 3 people, 5 people, have a lead for the team. But it's really good to have someone who really does care about this and is dedicated to it. If you think about, do I need a security team? Yeah, of course, like that's a guarantee. Then I think you also need to have an SRE team. So in summary, build a solid team with your core values, inject chaos and trigger faults, automate, monitor and alert, take responsibility, auto-remediate, reduce pages, reduce pain, and most importantly, care deeply. That's what it's all about. We need folks who really care about the customer and are there taking it seriously. Some people want it to happen, some wish it would happen, others make it happen. Just a fun quote that I really love from Michael Jordan. Thank you so much for listening to my talk today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you on the Slack. There's over 5,000 of us in there, so just go along to gremlin.com/Slack and feel free to drop me an email, tammy@gremlin.com, and find me on Twitter, Tammy X Bryant. Thank you so much. Have an awesome day.